PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. I'd like to show you another of my favourite games played by Boris Spassky. And this isn't as swashbuckling as those I've showed you already. This is more strategic in nature, however it does conclude with a really nice attack. So it's played in the Netherlands in the Hoogovens tournament in 1967. And he's playing against Larsen, who at that time was also on great form. Spassky, I think, came to the peak of his powers really in the late 60s, early 70s. So let's have a look at this. D4 from Spassky. And Larsen plays the Grunfeld. And typically for Spassky, he goes for the main line, the classical continuation, seizing the centre and playing the bishop to c4. Well, that's somehow so typical of him. Now, there are many ways for black to play this. Remember that Spassky defeated Fischer twice in this line. Once in 1966 in the Piatigorsky Cup and once in Siegen 1970. So Spassky really understood this system very well. Now Fischer went with c5, but Larsen preferred to play something a little bit offbeat, knight e2, and then queen d7. So this is a very strange looking move. So basically he wants to fianchetto with b6 and bishop b7. But he wants to avoid h4, which has a good reputation. The point is that after h4 here, black can actually try queen g4. It's a little bit awkward. But in any case, Spassky isn't interested in any of that. He just castles. Happy to have a nice centre. And Larsen duly brings the bishop out to the long diagonal. But that's blocked in by this nice pawn chain, or blunted by this pawn chain. And this, in fact, is the major theme of this game. Can Larsen actually get this bishop into play? Spassky's blocked it out. Knight c6. So you can see, the queen isn't, now that the bishop is here, the queen is not badly placed on d7. It's going to allow a rook to come to d8. And Spassky just plays rook c1, just bringing the rook into the middle, or near the middle, and queen d2, just simple development. He's getting ready for this move, c5, and rook d1. Queen a4. Okay, well this looks pretty normal. So looking to try to control this square and also looking at this pawn. Now, if d5, this is so often the move that white wants to play, then black does get pretty good counterplay with e6, and that starts to open things up. If c4, bishop a6, and there's pressure here. And if knight c3, queen b4, well, you can see, there's pressure. So Spassky doesn't want to do that, deal with that. He plays bishop h6. Well, this has to be good strategy, exchanging off that bishop on g7, which is looking at white's centre. Now it's possible to exchange and take that pawn here, but then white carries on with h4, h5. I think Spassky would have been very happy with that. He loves attacking, and that seems like a very natural attack without risking too much. It's a long time before that a pawn can get going. So Larsen played knight c4, and that was taken, and Spassky exchanges off that bishop. It doesn't look like there's too much going on, but well, how Spassky plays this, I think, is beautiful. Perhaps you'd like to have a little think. How would you play here with white? White to play. Well, this knight isn't doing much. So Spassky played knight g3. And already black has to be a little bit careful. I mean, if something like e6, then queen g5, threatening knight h5, shows the knight is in the right place. So that's why f6 was played by Larsen, just controlling g5. I mean, it still doesn't look too bad. And this knight, well, where's it going? Well, this is where it's going. This is a lovely maneuver. So the queen came back, and knight e3. Now that looks a lot better than e2. So it's looking at some absolutely key squares in the position. Larsen decides to take on d4. He could have tried f5 to try and, lengthen the diagonal of this bishop. But, it takes a lot of guts because that does expose the king. I mean, there are pros and cons to this. The bishop does look a bit better, but it's still blunted by this pawn. Larsen took here and played rook d7. Okay, so that stops a rook coming in. d5. So this bishop is looking worse and worse. And that's a lovely centre. Rook d8. So Larsen is building to playing this move. Knight g4. And that's a great move. So if e6, this is the major theme in this game, is e6 possible? Then e5. And this just opens up the king. That knight is ready to hop in if f5. So rook takes, queen check. And, well, white has a winning position here. This is just too much with the rook potentially coming here as well. So h5 pushes the knight away. So if the knight goes back, then e6, and black is in business there. But first of all, queen h6 check. And only then knight e3. And in this case, e6 doesn't work because of queen takes g6. So instead of playing the freeing move e6, Larsen played queen g7. Now I dare say the endgame is a bit better for white, but of course it's much better to keep the queens on. I mean, just compare the two queens. White's is a stronger piece. And now here we go. Look at black's king side. And it's just kind of opened up a little bit. The pawns have come forward. So Spassky plays king f2. Oh, very nice. Once again, we see that Spassky is such an expert in how he handles his king. You see that in the King's Gambit. If you might recall, a game I showed on the channel a long time ago, where Spassky played king f2 in a King's Gambit against Yassasirawan. And somehow that just opened up the position. It was beautiful. So why is he playing this? Well, let's have a look. He wants to play g4 and bring the rook to g1 to attack down the g file. So again, f5, e6, or well, e6 isn't possible. That can just be taken, but f5 is a possibility, but very risky. I mean, it does let the bishop out, but you can see that, after this, rook c7, basically white is going to win a pawn, and the king looks a bit odd there. But there aren't that many pawns left on the board. I mean, that's one chance, but it's not pleasant. So Larsen played queen f7. He's still angling for this move, e6, but g4. And, well, what happens on e6? I want to show you a long line here. Larsen took on g4, but let's have a look at e6. I think this is very interesting. It is possible, but I want to show you a wonderful variation. So this didn't happen, but you can see the power of the queen and knight. Okay, in exchange on h5, you can see the king is opening up. White's king very secure here. Lovely pieces in front of the king. Rook c7, where you can see that the king is very exposed on the 7th rank. And this is highly unpleasant now. There's going to be knight f5 soon and an attack on the king. So bishop c6, knight f5. Now black's positions are not great. If bishop d7, you just take a pawn, for example. Queen d7, watch this. This is so beautiful. Queen f4. I mean, it's a computer variation, of course, but somehow very thematic. So threat to play queen h6 and take the f-pawns, therefore here. Now watch this. Queen check and queen c1. What a move. Beautiful steps with the queen. So knight h6 is threatened, as well as queen takes bishop. And if check, the king is safe. The king is going to come here. Safe. It's absolutely safe on f4. So this is still threatened. And if bishop d7, queen g1, and mate on e7. I mean, that queen is phenomenal in that variation. I mean, it was working so hard. So it checked on c7, came back to f4, checked on h6, so that's a nice finesse. And on c1, it bounces round finally to checkmate on the g file like this. Incredible. Beautiful variation, but that shows the power of the queen and knight. Such a deadly duo when it comes to attacking. Right, back to the game. Sorry for that little digression. So Larsen exchanged on g4, and now the g file is opening up. e6 played. Well, I can understand Larsen's frustration here. That bishop is just a dead piece. It's doing absolutely nothing. But I'm afraid it's no good. Spassky snapped that pawn off. I mean, Larsen was hoping to get some play here, but nothing's doing. Basically, once the h file opens, that only helps White's attack, because this will swing over. Rook f8, queen g5. I mean, the endgame is obviously winning for White with this beautiful pawn chain. Queen g7, rook c2, that just covers the 2nd rank. I mean, there's no hurry here, actually. Rook g3, lovely. Defends the pawn and prepares to swing across here. And knight g4, and that was the final move of the game. Larsen resigned. Well, there's no decent defense to rook h3 and knight h6, for example. Rook here, rook h3 check, king goes back, check. Now the king's in the line of the rook, and of course the discovered check wins the queen. I just love that game because it's so thematic. Everything, it felt there's an inevitability about Spassky's win there. There was just some lovely steps. I think, it all started really with this very nice spin with the knight coming round to the e3 square. Once the knight is there, then Black's position is a bit shaky. It's not lost, but you can see the way the traffic is going. At least when we see the game afterwards, it's very clear which way the traffic is going. Absolutely stunning from Spassky. And that just showed, he could play with a great romantic spirit, like those wonderful King's Gambits and the Spanish that we saw the other day. But he could play wonderful strategic chess as well.